Assalamu alaikum and very warm welcome to this introduction tutorial of research methodology. I am Farhan Sarwar and I will guide you throughout this video tutorial. The outline of our topic is defining research, why we do research, motivation to be a researcher, what are different types of research, what is difference between research methods and research methodology, what is a scientific approach to research or what kind of research we can call a scientific research. Then we will have an overview of research process and what are criterias or hallmarks that makes our research a good quality scientific research. According to Redman and Mori, a research is a systemized effort to gain new knowledge. It's a very general approach that when we want to acquire or we want to learn about new things, the approach we used to do is research. And it's not just a philosophy or just a very flexible approach that anyone can design their own methods to learn new things. There are some rules and regulations that we will, of course, discuss in this course that makes a research a good quality research. Often, when we have to solve some problems, we have to make some decisions, a new discovery has to be made, new invention or innovation of the existing product, a systematic approach is used, and that approach is called a research. Um, Another definition of research that is a bit detailed is that we define and redefine problems, formulate hypotheses, suggest some solutions, collect and evaluate data, make some deductions, and some conclusions are all part of the research. So we should be clear that whenever we are talking about research, especially as an academic course, we should keep in mind that the purpose of research is to discover answers to questions through application of scientific techniques, scientific procedures, not some common sense procedures or not some beliefs or not some intuitions, but some scientific systematic approach, and all that approach that we are going to learn during this course. The main aim of research is to find out the truth. And of course, when we are talking about research, we are talking about something new. We need not to reinvent the wheel. We not to do research on something that is already known to us. When we are talking about research, it means that something new, at least a bit of newness should be in the research. That's the hallmark. So each research study has its own specific purpose, and the objective of that study can be falling into one of these broader goals. We can have a research study to gain familiarity with a particular phenomena. Now, what do we mean by that? There are some topics or there are some areas that have not been explored previously. Just take example of corona. Although scientists know a lot about the structure of that virus, and it is a variation of the old virus, that is SARS, that was found in 2003. There is an 86% overlap between the two viruses, but there is so less that is known about the epidemiology or the characteristics how that virus affects humans, and there is very less that is known about the treatment if one is getting infected about virus. So you must be hearing in news that there are lots of trials, lots of research, laboratory research that is going on with what kind of medicine will be suitable for corona. And all those research trials that are going on are actually exploratory in nature, because previously very less is known about that. We can also conduct a research to describe characteristics of something, uh, which means that we need to know what, not how, but what of something. These descriptive research study can be about preference of some product, or about the preference of some mobile, or about who has for example, we need to compare between males and females, that who have more buying tendency, binge buying tendency. They like to buy more from the market, who spends more on their clothes. So these kind of studies in which we are actually interested in characteristics are descriptive research study. If our objective of the study is to find the solution to a problem, uh, and dig deeper into it, then we can also carry out the diagnostic studies. For instance, we have a clinical test to diagnose uh, some disease. So that kind of study is basically a diagnostic study. Then that is study which is very famous in social sciences are the correlational studies, which are actually types of descriptive studies. But in these correlational studies, we are actually finding association between one or two variables. If the purpose of our study is to find if whether job satisfaction is related to employee performance, so we mean that job satisfaction and employee performance are associated or related variables. Finally, the type of studies in which we can understand whether one variable causes a change in other variables, those types of studies are called the causal studies. Normally, causal studies are based upon experimental designs, because we need to conduct an experiment to know if one variable is actually changing other variable. Uh, Throughout the history of mankind, how much humanity has progressed is because of their tendency to inquire, their tendency to learn, their tendency to think, to ponder upon things, to try to understand those things which they have not understood. Right from the example, the classical example in which when Newton saw an apple falling on the ground, there was a question mark that was raised in his mind, which led him to discover gravity. Similarly, when we say that research includes the scientific and inductive thinking, it means when we observe something, we always try to find or try to understand those phenomena. And this actually develops the logical habits of thinking and organizing thoughts. In all this knowledge that has been generated, the role of research has been immense. Take the example of applied economics. In several fields of applied economics, whether that is related to a single business or an industry or a economy as a whole of a country, of a whole world, the role of research has been very important recently, because the businesses are getting very complex. You need some strategies to improve your customers' satisfaction, to enhance your sales, to get the best productivity from your employees. So there are lots of variables which are making businesses very complex, and there are lots of issues that arise from day-to-day basis or long-term issues. And to solve those issues, research is is the best tool that is available. Similarly, for government, research has come as an aid to economic policy. Let's take an example that the government has to make a budget, and first of all, they need to understand the needs and desire of the people, and secondly, they need to know what is the availability of revenues to meet those needs. So the cost of needs has to be equated to the probable future revenues, and this is where the research plays the most important part in budgeting. Through research, the government can devise alternative policies, and they can also examine what will be the consequences of those alternatives. Even though decision making is not a part of research, but certainly it is an outcome of the research. Just imagine the government, while making the budget, has to think of so many variables, so many stakeholders, uh, businesses, industries, working condition, trade unions, um, transport, fuel, nature of people, social structure of the people, preferences of the people, prevailing issues, unemployment. There are so many variables that play its part, and only the tools and techniques that are provided by research methods can help them understand and reach a conclusion. In the same way, research has a special significance in solving various operational and planning problems that are related to business and industry. A very common example is like decreasing sales. And of course, it is also important for the social scientists and psychologists understand the behaviors of people, the behaviors of society. uh, for example, we can have a new research nowadays that what are the psychological issues that can raise among the people due to social isolation, being staying at home. How can it affect the psyche of the people? So all these highlights the significance of a research in general. Why would you like to do research in future? There can be so many answers to it. Perhaps you are interested to pursue your career as an academician, so you will be doing a research-based degree, or MPhils or PhD. So that is where you are doing research, or you are a kind of a person who likes challenges and likes to solve unresolved problems and issues. So you can take up research to solve those problems. um, or you are working in an organization and you require to solve the managerial issues. For example, you are in a marketing department of an organization, and there is a whole new branch of marketing research which tries to find out how to improve the sales and how to improve the profits, how to improve the product so that customers prefer it. So that this way you can do research, or you can be a researcher in some organization, and that is your livelihood. Your career is based upon that, or perhaps you like to learn and you like to get appreciated. So by research, you can bring out new knowledge, and you can get recognition in the literally academic field, and even you can get recognition. Lots of Nobel prizes are awarded to the researchers for their contribution in a particular field. Or perhaps you are interested to do research because you want to understand others people's work. You studied something, some phenomena somewhere, and you were not able to grasp it. So you started doing your own research, and you found that there the person has actually, you can actually appreciate or you can actually reject others people's work doing research. And an important aspect that why we need to something of the research, and that is very pertinent to what is happening nowadays. We need to appreciate the difference between what is a pseudoscience or false science and what is a real science. There are so many myths and false treatments that have been suggested for corona, uh, and not this is not the first time. Previously, you see, and thanks to the social media, lots of false treatments are suggested. Previously, when corona arrived, COVID-19 arrived for the first time, so many people suggested that drinking a ginger tea, taking some herbal treatment, taking steam is the remedy for corona. And what happened because of that false treatment, so many people lost their life. In Iran, there's an example that thousands of people lost their life because they were advised by pseudoscientists or false doctors to drink a particular chemical. So that is what happens, and due to these pseudo sciences, these false sciences, they are actually become very popular, and they're actually prevailing in other courses as well, not only in medicine or in health. You can have pseudo scientists in the field of management as well. People who are just projecting or just propagating the ideas which have no scientific proof, and still they want to others to accept, and others do readily accept because they find some popular beliefs, some they're interested in those ideas, and they think that those ideas are actually very good, but in reality, scientifically, there is no support for those ideas. So once again, if you can pursue a career in research, research can help you be a good manager. Either you can do a research when you are a manager yourself to understand and solve organizational problem, or you can at least uh, interpret. If you have hired an external researcher or someone else is doing your research, you can at least interpret the results and apply them. You can always get a satisfaction of acquiring a new skill by learning research. You can appreciate other work, and you can better understand existing knowledge or existing literature, and understand the difference between a pseudoscience, that is a false science, and a scientific explanation or a scientific knowledge. We can classify research with different perspectives. First of all, we can have a descriptive versus an analytical research. A descriptive research is composed of surveys and fact finding inquiries, in which our purpose is to describe something as it exists at present. In social science and business research, uh, we often have a term that we use is ex post facto research. So, what do we mean by this ex post facto research? It means that when we are doing a research in a real life scenario, we don't have a control on the variables. Like, we cannot control the customer satisfaction. Only thing we can report is what is their level of satisfaction, and how this satisfaction affect over sales perhaps, or loyalty of the customer. So most ex post facto research projects, which are actually descriptive in nature, uh, actually measures something such as frequency of shopping or preferences of people, and they attempt to discover some causes of why this thing is happening, or how something is affecting something else. Generally, the research that we carry out in our social sciences are most of the time descriptive or ex post facto in nature. On the other hand, analytical research, the researcher has some knowledge at hand, either through acquired by some primary sources or some secondary sources, and they have to make a critical analysis of that information. Then we can also classify the research as applied or fundamental. Other name for fundamental research is basic or pure research. So the pure research or basic research or fundamental research is different from the applied research. In applied research, we actually concentrate on the problem that society or industry or a business is facing right now. Whereas in fundamental research, our aim is to generate some literature that can be part of the existing knowledge base or existing literature that can be published in a research paper, that can be presented at a conference, or that can be um, part of a book. So, if you think that there is a research that is carried out on some natural phenomena or some aspect of pure mathematics, it will be fundamental in nature. Or another research that can be carried out to study human behaviors, to generalize how people act in a certain manner in certain situations, then that is a fundamental research. On the other hand, if some organization is facing a severe issue of revenue downfall or drops in sales, they may do a certain research to find out that why this problem is happening. That will be an applied research. Third, we can differentiate the research in the form of quantitative and qualitative. As the name suggests, the quantitative research refers to some numbers. It means that if we are measuring something in a quantitative research, it is a quantity or amount that can be quantified or changed into numerical form. Qualitative research, on the other hand, is concerned with some phenomena, some quality of a certain thing that cannot be quantified, that we cannot assign number to, but we can study it in its own genuine form. So when we say, and we will discuss about this later on in detail. Then another classification is conceptual versus empirical research. A conceptual research is related to some complex ideas or abstract ideas or theory, to develop some new concepts or to interpret the concepts that are existing. On the other hand, empirical research consists of some experience or some observation of the phenomena. It uses some data, comes up with conclusion by analyzing that data, or it involves collection of data by observation or some experiment. And this type of research is mostly that we call a scientific research. We can also have other classification of a research. A research can be a longitudinal, which means over a longer period of time, or a research can be cross-sectional, which means that we collect the data at one point in time, like a picture. That in quantitative research, the data is generated in some numeric form. And when we talk about quantity, we know it is something that is fixed for a certain person or a certain thing. We can also classify this numeric approach as inferential, experimental, or simulation approach to research. In inferential approach, our purpose is to form a database from which we can find out the characteristics or relationships of certain variables in our population. So the descriptive research that we carry out is actually an inferential research, and cross-sectional correlational research that we carry out actually find form of a inferential approach to research. The experimental research, in experimental research, the researcher has a greater control over the research environment, and they have some leverage to manipulate the variable. What do we mean by manipulate the variable? That is, we can keep something fixed. Just imagine a laboratory. When an experiment is being performed in laboratory, it the environment of the laboratory is set by the researcher him or herself. Whereas if we are carrying out a research using a survey in an organization where people are working, we cannot control the variables. We cannot control the moods of people. We cannot control the effect of pandemic on unemployment, because this pandemic or this coronavirus or the COVID-19 disease is not in our hand. So when we are doing a research in a real life situation, we cannot take the experimental approach, because in experimental approach we assume that we can control the variables. We can change the value of one variable to see how it affects the dependent variable. Nowadays there is a trend of simulation studies, and that is actually more trendy because of the computers. We have the devices in which simulations can run, and we can create an artificial environment or an artificial laboratory by which we can an artificial environment in which we can generate or require the relevant information in a controlled condition. Of course, that is how a laboratory works. Similarly, we can have simulations in business and social sciences by which we can apply certain numerical models. We can have time series models. We can have forecasting models by which we can get the results of our experiment to a simulation. Qualitative approach is totally different from quantitative. In this, we are mostly concerned with more a subjective assessment. We don't have numbers. We have certain extensive things to interpret. We can have interviews of people, we can have textbooks, we can have newspapers, we can have opinions, we can have long audios to interpret from, we can have long statements to interpret from, to find, to dig deep that about a certain phenomena. Mostly qualitative research is exploratory in nature, and we can generate results either in quantitative form, or we can generate results in qualitative form in the form of discussions. What is difference between a research methods and methodology? When we say method, we actually mean all those techniques that we are using in performing research. Now, these all the techniques, that is data collection, method, sampling, analysis, all the techniques are actually part of the research method when we are doing practical research. On the other hand, methodology is understanding how we are doing research or how we are solving the research problem. So, methodology is basically a science of studying how the research is done in a systematic and scientific manner. Why choosing a particular research method is important, because when we have chosen a research method, we apply it. But when we are concerned why we have chosen a research method, then we are actually talking about the methodology. Sometimes we say survey research is better than interviews. Sometimes we say that experiment is not a practical option. We need to conduct a survey. All those kind of discussion is part of research methodology. We consider the logic behind why we are actually using a particular method. In research, the scientist has to understand why a particular research decision needs to be implemented. The scientist has to be very clear and precise on choosing the tools and techniques. So when we talk about research methodology, we are not only considering the methods. Method is part of methodology. We are also considering the logic behind the method we have used, and that logic is actually in the context of the purpose of the research study. Why we are using a particular method, why we are using a particular technique, and why we are not using other methods. So that is a difference between a methodology and a method. Whenever we are going to discuss research, especially in academics, actually we mean scientific method. So the two terms research and scientific method are actually overlapping or closely related. A scientific method has certain attributes which make it different from a pseudo-scientific or intuitive or belief-based methods. It is logical. There is always a logic or a philosophy or a theory behind the phenomena that we are discussing or the proposed relationships, it always proceeds in an orderly step by step approach. There is some evidence, there is some data to support our research. The research is objective. We have a specific purpose in mind by which we are actually doing research. The researcher is neutral. Researcher is not allowed. There cannot be any bias. And how can we avoid the bias is by adopting a systematic method, a method that everyone is using. So when a researcher is using some established and systematic methodology, and that methodology can be used by other researchers, then it is a scientific research. So let's take a look at the flow chart of the research process. We often define with a research problem issue that is faced by organization, gap in the literature. Then we proceed to the review of the existing literature. From the review and combining with the research problem and research question, we formulate hypotheses. Once the hypotheses are there and we need what to test, then we design research. Then we collect some data, do some analysis, and if there is a problem in the analysis, we can always go back to the research design and we can interpret the result. Let's one by one go through each step. Every research starts with a problem. Now this problem can be related to some nature of something, how a disease is spreading, or what are the symptoms of a patient, that is nature of something, or it can be a relationship between two or more variables. So whatever the problem it is important to understand the problem thoroughly and then convert it into some meaningful statements, which are often like problem statement, then research questions and research purpose, from which the researchers can take up the systematic approach to investigate the problem. Once we are done with our research problem and we have generated our research questions, then we need to consult the existing literature. We have a written problem in front of us. Now the researcher should consult all those studies or many studies that have been written in the same context as our problem. Why it is important? It is important because we do not need to keep on repeating doing something that we have already is being done in the literature, or perhaps we need to find what type of solution being suggested, or we need to find or justify our problem with some theory, with some previously established models. So that is why we do literature review. What are the sources to consult? We can consult published or unpublished materials or articles or conference papers, books, websites, government documents, records, and there is so much that is available on internet that we can and we cannot consult. And we will later on discuss this in detail. Then we always proceed to develop some hypothesis. A hypothesis is a tentative statement which is testable. So when we are done with literature review, we generate some hypothesis. Uh, how what can be a hypothesis? Like a hypothesis mentioned here that plants which are watered with liquid vitamin B grow faster than plants that are watered with liquid vitamin E. Or job satisfaction is related to job performance. All these kind of hypotheses which can be tested uh, are actually uh, important to proceed with the research. With the research design, the researcher will be able to actually get some results from the research. So, but there are different components of research design, and it depends what type of research design also depends upon the objective of research. So, either we can have experimental, survey, action research, observation, or case study. How much researcher is able to interfere in the research setting? Is it that it's a contrived research in natural, in an artificial environment, or a non-contrived research which is in a lab environment or in a natural environment? What is our unit of analysis, what data collection methods we are going to use, survey, observation, what is our sampling design, are we randomly selected over sample or we are going for a non-random convenient sampling, how are we going to measure the data, what are the instruments, are we using some uh, measuring instruments like a thermometer, are we using some tools like questionnaires to measure. So all these are detailed part is actually the research design, and later on we will discuss it very elaboratively. So here is a example of a sampling. A sampling is a very important part of research design. For the time being, we will not go into detail, but you should keep in mind sampling is actually choosing a part of population from which we can collect data, or whose characteristics we study, and then we can generalize to whole population. So data collection is an important part of every research, either it's quantitative or qualitative, experimental research or descriptive research or causal research study, or what is the type of research we need to collect some data. Primary data means that we are collecting the data first hand from the respondents. So either we can collect by observation, by different types of interviews, via some surveys, or we can collect the data from the secondary sources. That is data that is already published, and that data can be useful. For example, government records, as the SCCP websites, documents, annual reports of an organization, documents that are published by state bank. All these data can be helpful for our research, and we can use them to analyze our problem. And it is important that our data collection phase should be executed such that we get adequate and dependable data. If we lag at this stage, our future analysis results may not be as reliable as we expected. The analysis of data is a critical phase, because once we have designed a research problem, we seek answers, and it is only the analysis which can give us the information that we desire. So we need to understand few things. We need to understand what type of data we have collected. Is it a quantifiable data? I administered a questionnaire in which there was a question: how much you are satisfied with the new medicine, you are satisfied with the service of a particular mobile mobile company. You are satisfied with the services of a particular mobile company, and you say, I strongly disagree, disagree, I'm neutral about that, I agree, or I strongly agree. Now you would imagine that this strongly disagree to strongly agree are actually not numbers, but we know that we can quantify, we can assign numbers because they are fixed responses. However, if I ask you, are you satisfied with a particular mobile company, and you just tell me in the statement that yes, I have been using this mobile same for this much time, and there is so much interruption, internet is not good, the speed of internet is not good, the packages are not good. However, that mobile company has a certain package that I like, or my family member is using that mobile. So all this information is a qualitative. I cannot translate into a number. So you need to understand how to collect data, so that if you want a quantitative research, you can quantify, you can code your data, and you can put it into some software in form of numbers, so you can do analysis. An important aspect of analysis of data is to screen the data to find out if there are some issues, if there are some missing values, or if there is some inconsistency in data. Then What type of result do you require? Are you interested to look the characteristics of a sample, then descriptives, means, mode, median, standard deviations, frequencies? They will be helpful. Are you interested to compare the means of the group? Then perhaps you can have t-test, ANOVA, and other means, chi-square test. Are you interested to find the relationship? Then correlations are good. Are you interested to, if some variable predict change in other variable, then perhaps you can opt for regression or structure equation modeling. And there is also a time series analysis and forecasting approach that is mostly used for economics research. What kind of hypothesis testing are you technique are you adopting? Is your data normal? Then maybe you can use a parametric approach. Or if you have a data which is not normal, it is not following the bell curve, then maybe you use non-parametric. Then another question is, what kind of software are to use? Of course, this is related to this particular decision, that what is your objective, what result do you require, then you will take the decision to use the software. There are so many softwares like SPSS, eView, Stata, Smart PLS, and these all softwares are for statistical analysis. Statistical analysis, and you can also have a software which is, so the decision to use which software do you need to use is related to what the results you require, what type of analysis you are interested in. You can have so many softwares that options of software, and they all have different purposes or different scopes. Like SPSS is a very generalized software. eViews and Stata is mostly used for economics and financial research and time series analysis. You can also carry out research in Excel. If you're doing structure equation modeling, then MOS is a very good choice. Or Smart PLS is also an emergingly popular software. Even you have software for qualitative research such as NVivo. So this decision is actually related to the type of analysis you plan to do. Then presentation of the research. Are you going to present in some tabular forms or in the form of tables? How to interpret research? So if you have this hypothesis, how can you say that, how to test is the result significant? So p values, or f square test for the effect size, you can also interpret the results. And there's another important aspect which is actually related to the sampling, is that can we generalize our results? uh, we collected data from a single organization. Can we generalize that to all of the organization of that sector, or all of the organization of the world? So this is also an important consideration in analysis of data. Then when you are done with all these previous steps of research process, uh, we need to present it. If we were a PhD or MS student, then of course your dissertation or your thesis is actually report the result. Or if you're an academic researcher, then often you report the research as a form of a research paper, or in a conference presentation. Or you can also upload your research on certain sites, although they are not, it's not a recommended approach. Getting published is an approach, then you are basically getting yourself recognized as a researcher. If you are a researcher in some organization, or you are working for some organization, then you also need to generate a report of your results, so that everyone finds out that what you have done, what process you have adopted, what methodology you have adopted, and what are your results. So finally, let's again go through the aspect of a good scientific research. Often these are also called the hallmark of the research. Uh, First of all, the research should be purposive. There should be a clearly defined objective, that why we are interested to do this research. What is the aim of our research? The research should be parsimonious. What do we mean by parsimonious? It means that we need to keep our research simple. If we see that one variable has impacts the dependent variable by 49%, and 10 variables impact the dependent variables in total 55%. So only 6% increase, and we are actually doing a research with a framework which is 10 times more complex. So that is not a recommended approach. We need to keep it simple approach to get the best result. Then the research should be systematic, which means that it follows a step by step logical process. And of course, our framework, our theory, our hypothesis should be based upon established logic. You just cannot say that we will have a new business opportunity on sun or on moon. Of course, maybe in future in moon, but right now it's not a logical approach. Empirical means it should be based upon some data to support your results. Replicable means that since you are following a systematic approach, then your results or your study can be replicated in other study settings to check if your hypotheses are generalizable or your results are generalizable. And testable means that you generate hypotheses which can be tested, which can be verified, and which can be refuted by other researchers. So that was all about our introduction to research methods. Uh, these are some revision questions that you can go through, and it will help you understand this chapter in more better way. Uh, Briefly describe the different steps involved in the research process. What do you mean by research? Explain its significance in modern times. Distinguish between research methods and research methodology. What is difference between a survey and experiment, and what can be a motivation to be a researcher? I consulted these two books, Research Methodology, Methods and Techniques, Chapter 1 by Bukhari, and Uma Sikaran book, Research Methods for Business, a Skill Building Approach. So that's all about today. Thank you.